Welcome to Sahara TV. Rona Peligal is the Deputy Director of the African Division of the Human Rights Watch. This is a position she has maintained since May 2009. Peligal helps manage Human Rights Watch's research on Africa, ensuring the quality and integrity of its investigation, and then strategizing on advocacy activities to promote human rights improvements in Africa. She's here with us to discuss the conflict in the Central African Republic. Rona, welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, now we know that Central African Republic, there's been a lot going on in the past year mostly, and also this year, there's a new president, a female.
That's right.
Her name is President Catherine Samba-Panza. Now, just give us a brief history of exactly what has been happening in that country.
Well, Human Rights Watch has been reporting on the Central African Republic since April, shortly after the Seleka, a coalition of rebels from the north, took power and ousted the former president named Bozize. And they committed horrific atrocities throughout the countryside, looting homes, burning villages, killing people, committing rape, the worst things that you can imagine. Starting in about September, another group came to surface. They're called anti-balaka, which means anti-machete, and what they were trying to do was to retaliate against the Seleka, to seek revenge, and then also to take power, to claim power back. Many had been loyal to the prior president. And what we then saw was some even more horrific attacks by the anti-balaka, specifically because a lot of the attacks targeted Muslims, not just fighting against the Seleka, but actually trying to kill Muslims because they were Muslim. And we saw a lot of very incendiary language. Much of this came to a head in December. The anti-balaka launched a very grievous attack on Bangui. At that point, the French sent more peacekeepers. There was an African Union force that came into effect. And now both of those peacekeeping missions are trying to maintain order. The Seleka leader, Jotodia, was forced to leave, essentially, in January, and we now have a new president, the former mayor of Bangui, the capital, Catherine Samba-Panza, who now inherits a very challenging environment.
Yeah, now when we talk about her, she just gave a speech. In fact, this was a very powerful speech and very positive in the sense that she was giving hope that, you know, something is working. And immediately after she had left, there was another killing. And this was done in the full glare of the cameras of the journalists that were present. And it was perpetrated by uniformed soldiers. Now, can you tell us exactly how this is happening and if there's any hope?
Well, it doesn't bode well for the conduct of the security forces, and you're absolutely right that the president was inducting in the new military officers, and after she left, one of the officers in uniform brutalized, killed, mutilated somebody who he's accused of being a member of the Seleka, which we don't know. The person was not in any uniform or anything. And people did witness it, and it was quite gruesome. I think we're still waiting to actually hear what the president says about the killing and about whether or not she takes action. Human Rights Watch has already called for the investigation and prosecution of the killing, and you know, we issued a very stern comment or warning saying that there will be no security, there will be no stability or peace or reconciliation if these kinds of incidents are allowed to happen under the full glare of the public without any kind of accountability.
Okay, so now we know that Chad has been taking a very positive stance in terms of even taking in refugees that are fleeing. And Chad is a Muslim community, Muslim country. Now, some have actually even called it a kingmaker of Catherine Samba-Panza. Is this true? Is there any element of truth according to your research?
Yeah, the Chadians are playing a very complicated role. On one hand, the Seleka include mercenaries from Chad. At the same time, the Chadians also are part of the African Union peacekeeping force. And Human Rights Watch has actually documented the Chadians escorting the Seleka out of Bangui, where they were forced to stay in their base, to northern towns where the Seleka are regrouping, which is inappropriate for the Chadian forces to do and violated what MISCA, the peacekeeping force, was empowered to do. So there's that. And then there's also the role that the Chadians are playing in terms of escorting Muslims out of the country because those Muslims very rightly fear retaliation. What the role is of the Chadian government is a little hard to see right now, and it's not something that we ourselves have documented extensively. We know that Deby, the president of Chad, is a regional player. We know that he likely had something to do with Jotodia's resignation. We haven't yet connected the dots on if there are any particular players that he's mobilizing in any particular ways. That's something we would like to look more at.
Okay, so now we have security forces, the AU, and a couple of others that are already on the ground. If somebody's being killed in public, and there actually been reports of them being present and trying to hold back the crowd that was trying to lynch somebody, and at one point they had to quite leave themselves, leaving that person in the hands of these people who eventually killed him. Now, what is their role and how effective have they been? And if this continues, what's going to happen? It's
a very good question, and it's a really important question. One of the things that we've been reporting on, and we have somebody on the ground, I should say, and have had somebody on the ground on and off since April. One of the things we're seeing is a lack of a concerted and assertive action by some of the peacekeepers. Some of the peacekeepers we've noted have been performing quite well and have in fact saved lives and intervened when they needed to. But others we have felt have been more passive than they needed to be. And so we've been engaging with the French and engaging with the African Union, saying you have a mandate to intervene to save lives here, and you should use that mandate. And sometimes they're circumscribed by the security protocols that they need to follow. But we actually have seen them improving a little bit, but there's certainly more that they could be doing.
Okay, and a lot of people have actually almost done like an exodus, leaving. And there are also peacekeepers, in fact, a civil society that's also leaving, and leaving the place almost like exposed in terms of relief and all that. Is the inflow of relief still constant, or is it the other way around?
Well, this question gets at something you asked earlier about there being hope. And I think one of the challenges in the Central African Republic right now is that there are no police, there are no courthouses, there are no judges. The whole administrative infrastructure has crumbled or been attacked. There's very little medical relief, with a few exceptions. Doctors Without Borders and the ICRC have been performing.
And the Frontier
are doing amazing work. But a lot of the schools are not in session. People are not really able to rebuild their homes. And we think that if there were, first of all, if there were more security, then you could have more humanitarian aid. If there were more humanitarian aid, then people would be less likely, perhaps, to take revenge on one another if they were busy rebuilding their lives. But they're not able yet to do that.
So there is quite a desperate situation.
Very desperate in humanitarian terms, absolutely.
Now, when the new president, gave this powerful speech, were there any promises, any plans laid out? And if there were, what were they? And do you think they might work?
I haven't actually monitored her speech, so I can't actually say what she promised. She'd probably be smart not to promise too much. But one of the things that we will be doing is meeting with very high-level members of the new government and also writing them a letter in the coming days, trying to make some very specific, concrete, and easy-to-achieve tasks that the new government can do to reassure the population that it is in fact in charge and it is going to enforce the rule of law in a manner that's human rights respecting. For example, one thing that she could do that would be very easy would be to promote reconciliation. And she actually has done that in some of her speeches. And that's very important, the idea that Muslims are in fact citizens of the country as well. They don't need to leave. They shouldn't be forced to leave. That would go a long way toward calming down a lot of the very inflamed emotions at this point.
I think they'd also help if they felt protected. Because after she delivers a speech and then somebody gets killed, I think that creates obviously uncertainty and confusion. But anyway, moving forward, do you think she's capable of taking over this country at the stage at which it is?
I think it's an enormous task for anybody.
Right.
I know that she's very popular. She's very highly regarded. Many people were happy about the appointment, but she can't do it by herself.
Right.
She's going to need a lot of help. She's going to need the help of peacekeepers, and in fact, we're calling for a UN peacekeeping force. She's going to need the support of the EU, of the UN, of the African Union, and she's essentially going to need help rebuilding the infrastructure and the institutions that have been so mercilessly attacked over the past 10 months.
Okay. Now, has anybody analyzed also part of her work besides people finding her popular because she was a public figure? Mm-hmm. Have people noticed how she used to perform as the mayor of Banjul before?
I'm not aware of her reputation as the mayor of
Right.
Bangui. I'm sure other people will know more than me on that. Bangui itself, however, has seen, and currently sees a very large humanitarian crisis with many thousands, tens of thousands of people camped around the airport, which has been under French protection. So, if nothing else, Samba Panza knows what she's getting into because she's seen it in Bangui itself.
Before, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now talking about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Human Rights Watch, you're the eyes on the ground. What specific advice have you given to help alleviate the situation, and to who did you give it to? Was it the government? Was it the AU? Was it the French? What did you do?
It's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that our staff have done, as I mentioned, we've had rotating teams of researchers on the ground, is they've actually sat down with the Seleka leadership, they've sat down with the anti-balaka leadership and said, we're watching you. We know what crimes you've committed.
Right.
We have it all in our notebooks.
Okay.
In some cases, we know who did what. And we're going to use this information to send it to prosecutors. You could end up in The Hague. You could end up in jail for the rest of your life. You better stop, because we know what you're doing. And that's actually a pretty scary lesson, and a hard thing for them to hear. But I think our researchers were very brave in telling them that to their face. That's all. We have it all on camera, actually. And the other thing that the researchers have been doing has been actually talking to people who are committing the abuses, and saying, you have to calm down. Don't, you can't attack Muslims. You can't force people out. Let's all just take a moment and reflect. So there's also that role that we can play. And then, of course, there's the advocacy that all of our staff can do in Paris, where we have a constant presence, in Washington, where we also have an advocate, with the UN, where we have advocates, all trying to get messages out. We need greater protection. We need greater humanitarian support. We need messages of peace and reconciliation, and we need investigations and prosecutions.
Okay, so now that obviously your staff is obviously on the ground, how safe are they? Because the violence can be unpredicted. So how safe are they? Because we know it's Christian and Muslim, but do they discriminate on who to attack? How safe have they been, able to?
Our staff have been fine. It is, in fact, very dicey. And we are quite careful in making sure that we check in with the staff in terms of their security. One of the things that we have found is that traveling on the roads can be very difficult, not only because it's a very big country.
Difficult or dangerous?
Both.
Both.
And so, for example, we will sometimes, if we use a driver who's Christian, if the seleka are around and know that the driver is Christian, they might say, who are you and what's your name? And the same would go for somebody who is a Muslim driver. The anti-balaka might look at him and say, why are you here? And harass the driver and our staff. So far, not good. Everybody's
been safe.
Avoided any kind of
Is
violence.
there a specific way of telling that this is Muslim, this is Christian? Is there dress? Is it in the name? Is it in the speech?
I don't know that I could speak to that. In some cases, there's an ethnic group called the Peul, which are an ethnic group also known as Fulani, and which are very present throughout throughout the Sahel, since we're on Sahara.
Right, in the Sahara.
So in northern Nigeria and other parts of the Sahel, and they sometimes have a distinctive look.
Right.
So visually they can be isolated, but I couldn't say that about every Muslim in the country.
So they might as well be killing people who might not be.
Absolutely. I mean, the seleka, of course, killed. I mean, they were indiscriminate. I mean, they killed whoever they could chance upon. I don't think they were really asking who was Muslim or who was Christian, or they might have in some cases, but mostly it was pretty arbitrary.
Okay, Rona, in closing, I know this has been part of your research, part of your work. You've seen cases or dealt with cases in different countries where such conflicts would happen. What would you predict, say, in the next 5 months, 6 months, happening in Central African Republic?
I think it's always hard to make predictions because I'll inevitably be wrong.
Right.
But I think what I would say, here's what I would like to see. I would like to see a more robust UN force. I would like to see a stabilization and end to the kind of brutality that we're seeing, and the beginning of both reconciliation and justice for the worst crimes that were committed, along with, of course, the kind of humanitarian aid that the residents of Central African Republic deserve and need. And we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Okay. This has been Rona Peligal. She's the Deputy Director of the African Division at Human Rights Watch. Before joining the Human Rights Watch, Peligal worked as the coordinator of the African Women's Writing Project for the Feminist Press, which is a grant writer for Rutgers University, and a reporter, actually, and copy editor for the Central New Jersey Home News. Anyway, thank you very much, Rona. You've given us a very handful important information on exactly what's happening in Central African Republic. Thank you very much for coming to Sahara TV.